So I'm Barb. I'm the CEO of PredictiveHire. I'm sitting here in a little cubicle in our office space in Melbourne, Australia. And Booty, who's my partner in crime for today, is also based in our Melbourne office. And we have Carlo, who's joining us, who heads up our team in Asia, based in the Philippines. So look, whilst we're waiting for others to join, this session is very much about a learning session. It's a bit ambitious to think about how do we bring the knowledge that we've learned and the questions that we want you to be asking and we think you should be asking into a 1 hour session, but we're going to try our best. And whilst we're waiting, maybe do share with us if there are questions on your mind that you want to make sure you get answered through this conversation. Pop them in the channel, in the chat channel, and we'll do our best to get to them during the course of today. And just in terms of us, I'm going to assume that maybe you're not that familiar with us and why we do, who we are and why it is that we're wanting to run this session is, Booty and I came together about 3 years ago. His experience is obviously as a scientist. I'm not. My experience is in HR and in recruitment. And we felt that there had to be a better way. That hiring was pretty broken in terms of both the candidate experience, but also in terms of the bias that comes in when you're using people to make those decisions. And we wanted to find a better way to solve for that. So we've really invented something pretty new in market. It's the ability to understand whether someone's a good fit for a job through just 5 free text questions, usually on a mobile via a chat. But more than that, the piece about it that's really compelling for our customers, we work with a lot of consumer brands, is the fact that the candidate experience is pretty special. Candidates want to be able to share their story and who they are. They want to do it fast and they want to get something back from that. And we've really built something that delivers to their expectations. And the other aspect is, it's particularly after last year and the awareness around bias is the kind of acknowledgement that unconscious bias training is not really solving for bias in us as humans. It's very hard to train us out of our biases, that technology can really help you with that. And we believe that AI is a better way to address the issue of equity in your organization than humans doing that process. And we want to talk to you about how we think you can go about that yourself. So we're going to cover off some typical questions that we would really encourage you to ask when you're looking at, technologies and vendors to help you with your hiring and promotion. So that's us. And I'm going to kind of kick off with what are the questions that I hear a lot when I'm talking to heads of talent and heads of HR. It's usually these kinds of concerns. That the belief that AI is biased because it's coded by humans, that AI can systematize bias as it applies consistently. That's the machine side, just continuously processing that through, unlike humans, where we're not as consistent in that approach, and also that AI can amplify existing biases. If there are other questions on your mind that are potentially kind of blocking you, so to speak, for really being open to using technology like this, do share them, because the point of today is really to try and unpack some of that. And the reason why is that we understand, and I understand coming from your world, that there's a lot of fear in this space. That what we're talking about here, when you're bringing in technology to automate a part of your hiring process, it feels pretty scary to be delegating some responsibility to a machine, particularly when you look at all the stories in the media about what AI is doing to us in our lives, movies like The Social Dilemma, etc. And, just to share with you, you obviously got some brands that you're familiar with, Tesla and Airbnb. Tesla with its autonomous driving, is continuously challenged for whether or not that's a technology that we should embrace. And something that we might have fantasized about 20 years ago has now very much become a reality. And they've had to face a lot of fears that people have around that. Airbnb is another one where, if you had said to me 10 years ago, would I let a stranger come into my home when I'm not there, I would have said no way. But now they're, one of the most successful companies in the world, and they've also successfully challenged something that is, initially an experience that we would run away from. The car that's up there is really to demonstrate another more historical example of where when you look at a technology in the early stages, it sometimes feels very terrifying, but then you get used to it. You become normalized. And when the car first came out, they actually had people on street corners shooting guns into the air to warn people that the car was coming, at obviously a very slow pace, to make sure that they were, going to be protected and they wouldn't be hurt. So, we can kind of laugh at that now, but that's in a way where we are with AI. It's important to ask and important to challenge, but we also recognize historically that sometimes disruption, also means we have to fight our own fears. And the reason why that's so important is, this is a quote from some research that's very well known now about the bias that sits within CVs, the bias that sits within us as humans, and the fact that if your name is Letitia and Jamal, you just do not get the same callbacks as Emily and Greg. And in fact, Emily doesn't get the same callbacks as Greg. And you hear these quite extraordinary stats, like there are more men whose name is Tom, in the top executive suite in Australia, than there are women in the executive suite. So, there is pretty systemic bias. Some is conscious, some isn't. And this is really what we're here to try and tackle as well. So we're going to cover off a number of questions. We're going to talk about, what is AI? Just start with some basics and why does it matter? What value does it bring to recruitment? How can you leverage it for the benefit of your organization and your team? What are the risks to be aware of? What questions to ask? And we're going to introduce you to a framework that, we've been using for the last 3 years, which we've now shared with our community because we want everyone to really, adopt these same high standards that we think are really important to make sure that you're safe, that your people are safe, that your candidates are safe in the technology that you're using. So I'm going to switch over to Booty now, who's going to take us through the core tenets of AI.
Thanks, Bob. Hi, everyone. My name is Booty. I'm the principal data scientist at PredictiveHire. I want to cover some of the basics of AI before we get into the more deeper questions around bias and how we tackle that. I think a fear that we all have is, AI is such a, technical and complex topic. How do we address that? So what I want to do is to take the fear factor out and bring you to a comfort zone. Bob, I think you'll have to.
Yes. Sorry, I'm driving. Yeah.
Yeah, you'll have to. Sorry.
Yeah.
So we are already using a lot of complex technology. Whether we know it or not. Like take the computer for example. It's a highly complex device. We don't really understand exactly how it works, but we know the value, if we know the benefits, and we know enough to use it in our day-to-day lives. And same with the car you drive. So it's not something new, that complex technology is around us, and AI is no different. It's a tool that's kind of become available in maybe in the past, I would say in the decade. We've gotten close to it, but it's been around since the 50s when the term was coined. The thing is to know enough so that we can get the best out of it. And in order to do that, we Bob, if you can go to the next slide. So in order to sort of address that point, what am I supposed to know, and how do I go about learning and understanding AI? So we've come up with what we call a mental model. So essentially 6 questions that we think are essential in understanding AI at the concepts level, and understanding AI in your own specific use case, whether you are a user or whether you are thinking of acquiring a tool based on AI. And it's important to note that given that it's a deeply technical topic, you can go as deep as you like with the technical kind of knowledge or technical facts, but you need to start somewhere. And we are going to sort of go through the basic level, the top level, the basics that you need to understand. So it's at 3 tiers. First, the conceptual knowledge, then knowing the specific application that you are looking at, you are interested in, and then how to evaluate that. So at the top level, the first question is, what is AI? And that is to understand it enough that you go from magic to aha, that you know how AI systems work. And we'll come to that. And then the next is, once you've gone through that, you can start asking questions around your specific case. And the first question is, what data is being used to build my AI? So that's very important, because data is the place where the knowledge originates in AI system, and it can also be the place where the biases and other issues originate as well. So it's important to understand what data is used. So second thing is the algorithm, the mechanics. What is the algorithm really doing? So you need to have some basic understanding. Okay, given this data that I'm using, be it candidates resumes, what is the algorithm trying to do? So that's very important. And the fourth point is, how do I interpret the output given by the AI system? And that is key. It's about not blindly following something just because it's called AI. You need to know exactly what this output represents. If it's a number, what does that number mean? Is it a percentile in a population? Is it a probability that somebody is a fit or not? Or what does the ranking mean? So that allows you to interrupt what we call automation bias, that you just blindly follow what the system is saying. Then you get to evaluating your AI, specifically around fairness. Is this system, the whole system, not just the AI part of the system, but the end-to-end experience, is that fair, including the AI part? And on that, we actually have a framework, like Bob said. We'll come to that and how to address that question specifically. And then the last point is, what value does it add? So it's important to understand what you're trying to solve, and where the AI fits in. Are you trying to automate something? For example, a classic example is the spam filter. That's a pure automation thing. We don't even worry about spam now, because there's an AI piece of AI that's filtering out all your spam. Or are you trying to use AI to get more information, so that, or insights, so that it gives you more data to make your decisions? And that might be the case with candidate selection. So the AI will help you, giving you more insights. So if you are able to answer these questions, then that means you are at that level that you can evaluate and maybe get the best out of an AI tool. So let's start with this basic question: what is AI? And I want to start with some examples that all of us are familiar with. I'm sure you know that these systems are using some form of AI, and how useful they are. For example, especially search engines, and some of the speech to text systems. And if you have used Amazon Store or Netflix, how it gives you recommendations based on what you watched in the past. All of these systems are using AI. It's making some sense, finding patterns in the large amounts of data that typically a human can't really do. Um, and this is really about, if you're interested in a definition of what AI is, but I want to just touch on the point that, there's multiple, I guess, methods that are used within AI. And the most popular one is machine learning, where, an AI system learns from data. And that's the bit that we'll be talking about mostly. But remember, AI is not just limited to that. If you take a self-driving car, that uses like planning, scheduling, various other things as well. But we will be today talking mostly about machine learning, which is the most popular aspect of AI. This is really about, knowing the limitations and what it can and can't do. I think it's important to understand the boundaries. And like, we already highlighted, it's a tool that allows you to make sense of large amounts of data, because as humans, we are not so good at it. We might not have the ability to do it within a limited amount of time. Imagine millions of rows of data. Like, it's not possible for a human to do that. Secondly, we are influenced by emotions and various biases, that we might not see the more objective patterns that you find in the data, compared to an algorithm doing it. you know think of it as what you see in the physical world, with what we have invented, like the levers, the pulleys, the cogwheels, that are used to manipulate the physical world. And we know that that's given us this advantage in building civilization, etc. And the AI is doing the same thing with the large amounts of information now that we are capturing. This, it's a tool like the pulleys and the levers and cogwheels that will allow you to process the data and get something meaningful out of it. And without that, all the data that we are collecting is meaningless. And the last part is, is around the limitation that AI is not a replacement for human intelligence, not yet, at least. And what the AI that we are working with is mostly what we call narrow AI, which is built for a specific purpose in mind. It's not general like our own intelligence. We can look at different tasks and able to apply knowledge. Whereas in AI's case, AI is made for a specific thing. A self-driving car, the AI within that is not going to be useful in filtering candidates and so on. So that's important to keep in mind. Let me also quickly take you through what happens in a machine learning system. The idea of a machine learning system is to learn the patterns within a large data set, so that that learned model, what we call a model, the output from that process can be then used to make sense of unseen or future data. So think about a model that is used to say filter resumes, right? So we learn from whether it's a good or bad thing. We'll come to that later, but as an example, um, maybe I'll jump to the example that we have. Sorry, Bob, if you go to the next one. Yeah, so let's take this one. This, I think, is an easy example. Say you want to build an AI system to identify a good chair. And we can all agree the chairs on top, they are standard chairs, they look like a chair, it makes sense. And then you have, in the last row, some chairs which are actually chairs, but they don't fit the standard model of a chair, but they are still chairs. And then you have other objects which are not really chairs. Now, this is a problem that we can build an AI model to solve, right? And there are some key decisions that as a human that you need to make. First of all, you are the person who's going to decide what data is going to be fed into the model to learn. If you're only going to feed the top two layers, it'll only know about the standard chairs. And if you then ask it whether one of the chairs in the bottom row is a chair, it might say no, it's not a chair. So which we call a sample bias. That means the sample that you use to train the AI is very important. It's the same thing with some of the issues that we are seeing in facial recognition systems, that they are biased against darker skinned people because the training sample has been predominantly it's been white people. So the AI has only learned from that group, so it's not able to identify people from another group. So that's a key thing to remember. So this is a question that you need to ask from a vendor, or if you're assessing AI, what data are you using, and what is the sample that you're using. And then the other aspect is, even when you have a good sample that represents the population that you are thinking of applying it on, like what things from, what features, we call them features, what things are you looking at in each of these objects that you're trying to do something with, like in this case a chair. Like if you're just looking at the way it looks, if that's the only thing you're going to consider, you might miss out on what a good chair is. And we know, for example, for a chair, comfort is an important fact. And if you're not giving that as an input, the AI will not learn anything about that aspect. So there's something for the human to do before before thinking about AI, that is thinking about what makes a good chair. In a case, for example, in a case of a candidate, if you think about a candidate, what makes a good candidate? and and that is not something AI can do. It's something for the humans to do. And then once you define that, AI will learn from it. So that's very important, what features are considered. So for example, that's why features like age, gender, and the skin color, we know those things are not really relevant. And if you are using them to build a AI system, then the AI might learn something that is not really applicable, or that won't really give you the right results.
Hey, Booty, I'm just going to jump in there. So, for me, part of me being in this team with Booty is, I have to understand the science as much as I can to be able to really give you some insight as people who may not be scientists about how this tech works. And I'm just going to apply my simple HR lens to that. And, the way that I see it is, if you think about it as human beings, we're incredibly visual people. When I look at a picture of chairs, I'm going to make a decision immediately about something based on the color and some style that I'm really empathizing with. And it's the same with people when it comes to hiring, when it comes to who we want to date. We all rely on what someone looks like to make a judgment about, oh, do I like that person? Is there a connection there? And, unfortunately, that is very much how we're making most of our hiring decisions today as well. Sometimes it's based on video where, you're really not able to see who that true person is. And you're also going to miss out on a lot of people who might not even want to be part of a video interview because it doesn't make them feel comfortable. And when you think about what's most important in a role, is it really how they present on camera? Maybe if you're hiring someone to be in a sort of a beauty store, but usually what we're looking for is those things that are really internal to us. Our traits, how good a problem solver we are, how humble we are we a curious learner? Do we work well with people? And another data set that we look at that's also really flawed when you think about it is the CV. And the CV, again, is a visual document. And what most of us are doing is sort of scanning that in a few seconds and trying to form a judgment. And we're usually looking for those data points like, what school did they go to? What was their GPA? Where have they worked? But when you really ask yourself, are those a reliable predictor of that person being successful? Are there other predictors that are not contained in this CV? Is there information or data that I can't see in this CV? And there's a huge richness of data that is not visible in a CV and is certainly not visible through a video conversation. And that's really the point of looking at using a very, uh, uh, um, technologically impressive tool like PredictiveHire or like any AI assessment tool, is it can see what we can't see. And it can do that without the bias and the layers of entrained and ingrained bias that we've been brought up with. And it can obviously do that at speed. So that's the power of bringing AI in to help you do your assessment. Is it can see so many things that we'll never see, and it does so with a a very clean mind. Just one other thing, as Booty said, just I want to address that question that I get asked a lot, which is, well, if Booty's coding it, doesn't it mean it's going to be fed with his bias? There's actually two different things, concepts that are really getting conflated there. Absolutely for real, with some technologies, when they're built by only one type of person, let's just say white men or right-handed people or left-handed people, and you're designing something that has a usability that actually potentially is going to be informed by the way that that's coded, there is absolutely a risk of bias coming into that product. But it's a very different question to answer when you're looking at something that rests on AI, because it's about the data. The engineer, all their coding is a set of instructions to the data to find a certain pattern. There really isn't any room for the engineer's biases to be fed into that. The bias comes from the data. And so if you're using CV data to assess your talent, you are using really biased data, and you're certainly using imperfect data, or you're using a very limited data set. I could write a great CV and get through your parsing technology, but I may not be a great person for your role, for your organization. And so the really key area that we want, the market to be incredibly sort of almost ruthless about is, what is that training data? If it's coming from social media, if it's coming from CVs, if it's coming from past data that is not representative of the whole world, the whole community, then you're very much risking introducing bias into your selection process. Okay,
Thanks,
back to you,
Rob.
Judy.
Yeah. So this is really, once you build the model, this is applying it. So now you have a model, now you get new data from the environment, and then from that you get some insights or predictions. But there's also an important aspect here. So that's the input, the feedback you get back from using it. So it's very important, because if you're going to use some feedback to improve your AI or to test whether it's effective, you also need to understand, or think carefully what that feedback is. For example, if you're using some sort of a performance metric, you know, is that performance metric unbiased? Right? Is it objective enough that it's reflecting a performance measure rather than a bias measure? Then, because then you are going to give the wrong signal to the AI. Yeah. So we can go, I think, yeah, this is a more detailed example. I think you can read through this and
Yeah,
understand.
yeah.
I'm not going to.
We're going to share the deck,
Yeah.
and we'll put it on SlideShare. So, for those people who want to go deeper on the science and some of the data stories, you'll be able to do that when you see the slide deck. But I'm going to talk a little bit now, just from a really practical perspective. Hopefully, at this point, you feel that you've got a better understanding around AI and how it works and some of the call outs for you to think about. But why does it matter to any of us working in HR and talent acquisition? So the opportunities from AI are tremendous for organizations. The obvious one is automation. When you think about anything where you've brought in technology to make things faster, even think about the difference between calling a cab and using Uber. You're really freeing up a lot of your time through using that automation experience. In the context of hiring, often automation really makes a difference. It makes a difference because the time to fill is really critically important. If you're hiring for sales roles or service roles and you have an open seat, that really makes a difference to the business. And you could probably measure that, on a daily basis, what that's costing the business. The other aspect of automation is time, your time and your people's time. And often the most significant cost for an organization in recruitment is actually that invisible time of all those hiring managers conducting interviews, hiring people and rehiring because maybe they're not necessarily making better decisions about who's the right fit. So the time relief, the time give back is absolutely incredible, particularly if you're a high volume organization. Just to give you an idea, for most of our clients, we're averaging about 50,000 hours a year that are saved from using our technology. Think about what you would do in your organization with another 50,000 hours. It's transformative for how you might impact on other parts of the business. The other aspect is, everyone talks about data-driven decision making, data-driven insights is, it's very hard to make change if you don't actually measure what's going on. And when you start to use technology that's grounded in data, you actually start to be able to measure it. And I'll show you a little bit later of some of the data metrics that you can look at. But how do you know whether or not your hiring quality is improving? Do you just measure it on churn? And if you do know that, how are you feeding that back into your filters at the top of the funnel? If you honestly ask yourself and challenge our community and say, how many organizations have genuinely moved the needle around quality of hire over the last 30 years or over the last 5 years? I don't think that there'd be many who would put their hand up. Because if you don't have a way to feed that data back of who's working and who isn't, it's impossible to actually drive that kind of change. In terms of quality, quality is obviously really critical. We have a way of you being able to see what is the quality of talent that we're seeing come in. How does that differ by role, by geography, by time of year? And, how else do you really improve and make good decisions around recruitment marketing if you don't really know where your quality is strong and where your quality is weak? The same goes obviously for your hiring. The other aspect is bias, is that the beauty of using data to drive your decisioning, to support your decisioning, is you can actually track where is there bias in the organization. And the final one is really about candidate care that, again, I think we've been talking about candidate experience for the last decade, but what does it actually look like and how much real movement has there been? Is candidate care sending an auto email reject that says, thanks so much, we'll let you know if we want to interview you? I don't think so. And so what we think is the time is now for people to really feel dignified. It's a really tough job market, to genuinely help people learn about themselves. And most importantly, for you to really get that kicker in your brand because you're doing something that's truly candidate first, and helping your EVP. So, how do you actually do that? What does that look like? So obviously we're part of the PredictiveHire team. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of an intro into how we do it. And we think there are aspects of it that are really compelling at this time in market in terms of what people are trying to solve for. So the first is, there's a lot of assessments out there. Every week we see a different player coming on the market, and really your choices can be grouped into a couple of categories. One is you can stick with traditional psychometric testing, which has been around for about 50 years. And, the challenge with that is it firstly is usually only personality, and that may not be all that matters for success in the role. But the biggest challenge is it's really not a great experience for the candidates. You're forced to answer more or less the same question multiple times to get that validity. You're not empowered to really share your story. You have to pick from a multi-choice set of options, and you very rarely get anything back. And so it's kind of like a null experience for a candidate. But the other aspect is that, as a recruiter or a hiring manager, it doesn't really present as a profile that helps guide you to make that final decision. It doesn't tell you what questions to ask. And often it needs to be debriefed by an org site. From a technology perspective, it's a seriously deficient technology because it's not a technology. It has no learning capacity. And I know I'm being a little bit bold saying that, but the reality is what a psych test is doing is really proving how well someone does on a test. It bears no relationship to how someone will do in the role because there's no data loop that feeds back from those people who you've hired based on an OPQ that says those people with those scores do better than these people with lower scores. And that is the power that you get from using AI that's driven by that feedback loop, is that you're always improving the quality of your decisions. And that means the first day you start, you're starting to make that journey towards having an edge over your competitors when it comes to talent. So that's the one main segment. The other one is obviously gamified assessment, and that may work for some candidates. Personally, I think that in a lot of markets, people want something that feels really human and relatable, and playing a game doesn't always feel correlated to what the role's about. And then you have video AI, and that has its own challenges around bias. It's being challenged in the US courts at the moment, but also may not work for every candidate type. What we've chosen is a different way of engaging with a candidate that we think is, and we see with our data, is more inclusive, more comfortable, and more human. It's via chat. Everyone has a mobile phone. People text their friends and family. They feel very comfortable with it, and so they complete it, and they complete it with their own authentic voice. It's only 5 questions. It doesn't take very long, 15, 20 minutes, and every candidate receives back personalized feedback right at the point at which they complete it, which is incredibly powerful and a very big disruption to how we normally think about recruitment, where candidates usually hear nothing. And we think that ghosting should end, and the time is now for candidates to learn and get value and get recognition from the effort they've put into applying for the job. The next part is really about you and how you make your decisions. And you want to be guided by data, objective data. And so what we give you is that, but in a way that really enables anyone in your business to understand that, within a few seconds. It tells you what that person's score is, and the score is obviously a measure of their suitability for the role. But it goes beyond that. It also shows you how they look relative to market. Are you actually attracting great talent? And it starts to also guide you on the questions to ask, so that you make sure you're honing in on those critical areas and not offering and not giving standardized questions that may not get you to the right outcome. We have another product that we put out last year, which we call Live Interview, and that really applies principally for those businesses that do truly volume hiring, that move people through a top of the funnel with PredictiveHire through to a assessment center, or some kind of super day where you're bringing 10, 20, 30 graduates, say, in a room, and you're wanting to make sure that you run that with consistency, with efficiency, and with a minimum of bias. So that's a really exciting product that we're seeing, particularly those in graduate recruitment, taking up in large numbers. And then finally, we help you understand what's going on because you have access to all the data. A key part of us partnering with you is, how do you trust us? How do you trust the data? It's letting you see that data real time, unfiltered, unedited. So I've shared a little bit already about, the core philosophy that we have around how do you really assess people in a way that works for you and works for them. And we think this intelligent chat, which is really, really different to a usual chatbot. There are many chatbots out in market. I'm sure some of your organizations use them in your core business, but they don't have any intelligence to them, if I'm kind of to say it like that. What they do is they usually automate a fairly standardized set of questions, and they certainly help people get to a place where they get an answer, but you don't get anything back. There's no learning from that for the individual. And what we've built is something which under the hood from 200 words really gets you. It knows your strengths, it knows your weaknesses, it knows your communication skills. It can even predict your likelihood or not to stay in a job. And that's really the science that Booty and his team have built. The other piece that I think is really relevant for your market is, obviously it's personalized. It knows that my name is Barb as soon as I sign on. So I feel like I'm having a chat with a friend, but it can also be localized. And we understand that the way people engage and the greetings they give in different countries in Asia are going to be different. And so the ability to really then customize it to your local language, not in another language other than English, because that's our core, all of our AI is built around English, but certainly to use those phrases that make people feel comfortable and that you're respecting that they come from a certain background. Just to kind of go forward a bit here, I'm not going to look at focus on this one here. One thing that we'd love you to do if you haven't had a chance to do is to try it. I think the best way to really experience why it is that 98% of candidates love this and feel empowered by it is to do it yourself. Give it to your team to do it, give it to your friends and family to do it. The power it brings to you is, if you're a consumer brand listening to this, is you will know that every good candidate and every bad candidate actually flows through to your bottom line. There's plenty of research that shows there's a direct link, measurable in dollar terms, between candidates who love what they get through engaging with you in a recruitment process and those who don't. And what we're seeing with this is when we ask candidates, does this make you more likely to recommend you as an employer of choice? Overwhelmingly, they say yes. So it's an incredible boost to your employer brand, but also to your business brand and to your business bottom line. And candidates share with us why they love it. Every bit of this feedback comes to us, and you see it obviously in your dashboard. And it's either, I'm blown away. How did you do this? From 5 questions, this is amazing. Or it's gratitude. There's a lot of people saying, wow, no one's ever shared any feedback with me. This is fantastic. Or the third one that we particularly love is how it really helps motivate people and grows their self-awareness. Just to keep going through here, I just want to show you this because this is, I think, the real power of using technology like ours to really understand what's going on within your organization. So I'm going to actually take you straight into one of our core products, which is the dashboard, and we call it Discover Insights. And when you go live with this, what you see up here is our aggregated data. We call it Discover Insights. You'll be able to look at exactly what's going on by country, by role family, that, job requisition, and by time of year, by campaign. So you get this incredible, deep, rich insight about what's going on with your recruitment. Some data is data you'd expect to see, so volumes, candidate feedback score, how long it takes, and dropout. We track plagiarism, by the way. It's flagged for you in the system. And it's interesting how many people ask us how we test that it's really, me that's completing it. Firstly, 97% of people who get their feedback say, wow, how did you get me? So we know that they're completing it authentically, but we're also able to, measure and track and reveal where someone has engaged in plagiarism. And it's a pretty low amount, really, when you think about we're operating in across 34 different countries. This one is really powerful for you beyond just, automation efficiency. What it tells you is what's the quality of talent that I'm getting into my organization. And if it's less than 0.5, everyone gets a score out of 1, that says something about where you might need to invest in your recruitment marketing. We also show you that by gender. And then as we go through here, you can see where your candidates are coming from. This is all real-time data. One of the things that's really powerful, I'm just going to skip through here, is we can show you what's going on from a bias perspective in your hiring. So every organization wants to have an applicant pool that's pretty much lining up when you get to your high distribution. And so the ability to actually see that is incredibly powerful if you're trying to raise awareness and truly change diversity within your organization. We don't know, by the way, your gender or race, but we use an algorithm to translate from a name into gender and race with about 90% accuracy. It's only in reporting, it's not part of the process for your recruiters, so they don't see that information. But we're seeing that it's a very powerful way to elevate discussions around diversity in your company. We also track that by ethnicity. And then, the really cool thing is you want to get closer to your candidates, right? You want to know, what do they think? Like, is this something that works for them? And every feedback comment they give, and, many do, it's a very high percentage that do, you can see every day as soon as it comes in. And you can see here what people are saying. They basically just find it really comfortable. It's innovative. It feels very human. It's easy. And then you also get to see, well, what do they think about the feedback? Does that sound like me? And, you have these amazing comments here where people are like, it gives me more energy to live my life with more confidence. Other ones here, definitely helpful, extremely accurate. Um, There's another one here where someone says, wow, you hit the nail on the head with that. People don't typically get anything, and people crave, particularly young people. I think everyone does, but millennials, that opportunity to really learn from that experience. We work with a number of different businesses, typically high volume, and the cost savings are obvious when you're using technology to do all that work, because often the really heavy lifting in recruitment is the screening and the phone calls, which are really replaced by using our technology. So these are in obviously pounds, but you get to incredibly low cost hiring when you're using this kind of technology. One of our really proud clients, because they're such an advocate for candidate experience as well as fairness, is Qantas. This is our key sponsor, the head of talent globally, and for them it's all about being mobile first. It's about an experience that's less daunting for candidates. They previously used video AI, and they found the dropout rate was very high and people didn't feel safe, and it's obviously giving them the efficiency benefits as well. Okay, Booty, do you want to pick up here?
Sure. Thanks, Bob. So that's, you might think like that's all great. I'm sure you heard of these different concerns around AI. How do we navigate all this, especially this whole question around bias, algorithmic bias, and also the black box nature of AI. Like you might not understand what's going on. So how do you navigate this space? So what we've done is Bob, if you go to the next slide, what we've done is we've looked at the research and literature around some of the concerns raised by researchers and in mainstream media, and looked at the themes that are there in these concerns. So we saw five key themes. Obviously, first, the major concern is bias. Like, isn't AI really scaling human biases? And then the next topic is fairness. Like, the fairness is a broader topic than bias. So it's really around the way the AI works or the whole process. It's not just the final bit that the AI does. Like, for example, like Bob said, is games a good way to assess retail workers, or is video a good way to assess somebody who's applying for a call center role? So these, you know the, that's part of fairness. And then there are three other topics around the validity, how accurate it is. Is it really doing what it's saying it's going to do? And then you have the explainability, the black box nature of AI, and the accountability. So what we've done is we've taken all these concerns into account and come up with a framework that you can a identify and b go about assessing whether it fits the criteria. To start with, I think maybe before we jump into the framework, given bias is a major concern, let's kind of talk about that a little bit. Mostly AI bias comes from data. Like, I think Bob highlighted this early on. It's not really around who's building it, it's around what data goes in. Now, clearly, what data goes in is decided by somebody, and it's important to question that part, because that's not part of AI. It's somebody designed a system using, like we discussed, video, using CVs. Now, it's important to understand what the data is, firstly. Secondly, even from that data, what are you really looking at? In a resume, what are you looking at? Are you looking at the, maybe the school they've gone to, or are you looking at their GPA? Are you looking at their employment history? What is it that you're looking at in the resume? That is very important. So keeping data aside, like, even when you do everything right with data, then you get other concerns. Like, for example, you might be looking at the right data, but if your sample is not right, if you, like we discussed earlier, if you're not covering the population that you're going to apply it on, you're not going to get an AI that is effective. And the second thing is how you measure things. How are you measuring? For example, if somebody is a good fit, that measurement, with regard to performance, maybe, are you depending on a manager rating as the measure, or are you looking at something more objective than that? Can bias come into the measurement? So that's important to look into. Then there are other aspects like ranking and automation bias that we touched on a bit earlier. So it's good to be aware of all this. And And this is the framework that we've come up with. Bob, you wanna go through
Yeah.
that?
So, look, I think, we all know that technology is pretty much in front of regulation globally around this area. And, Booty and I watch movies like The Social Dilemma, and we worry about that. And how do we help you, and how do we help our market really level up and make sure that we're doing the right thing, and we're being extremely rigorous and conscientious about self-regulation and self-assessment. And so we obviously have been doing that since the beginning, and we see a fair bit of difference in maturity levels, I guess, in market, in terms of how people are embracing AI and the different tools that they're using, and many that claim to be AI that aren't, and a fair few that are pseudoscience. So we think this is a really serious topic, and we think that HR has a real obligation, a duty of care to your employees, to your board, and to your candidates to make sure that you're asking the right questions, whether it's our technology or anyone else's, to make the right decision and to be safe. So, it starts with what's the primary objective here that we're trying to solve for, and we think it's around using AI that's fair. And we have come up with a definition. It's not really our definition. It comes from some extensive research that the data science team have done, looking at all of the literature in this space. But it's a fairly uncontroversial starting point for thinking about how do you measure and assess this technology. In terms of what does it mean to be fair, fair AI in recruitment, it's really two sides. And there's a sort of a yin and yang here, because we believe that both are equally important to ensuring that you trust, and your organization can trust the technology that you're using. The first on the left hand side is the critical one, which is, how does this product actually work? And in order to really assess it for fairness, it needs to be, we believe, ticking the box in a very deep way on four key dimensions. The first is it inclusive? Does everyone in your community, everyone that you're trying to reach for your organization, feel comfortable applying for a role using the technology that you've put in front of them? And that's going to be different for different types of people. But again, that's why we selected mobile phone and chat. That's blind, because we see that as something that people do every day, and everyone has a phone, and therefore it is an inclusive way to engage. Different solutions may not be as inclusive for everyone, games and video and so on. The second is, obviously, is it unbiased? And bias is not something you can just claim. It's not a piece of rhetoric that you can put out there in your website. It actually is something that's really based in a tech manual, in your bias testing. And it's something that we encourage you to ask for when you're talking to organizations, is show me your bias testing. How extensive is it? And on the right hand side, you can see that we believe it should be beyond race and gender. It should also look at age and disability status, neurodiversity, and we've even looked at socioeconomic status as well. So, think really broadly about what does it mean to be unbiased, and demand to see that analysis on a regular basis. And obviously, as Booty has said, you can't test bias after the fact. You really need to test bias before you put the product in front of your candidates. And so understanding where that is happening within the process is also really important. Explainability, if you think about in your roles when you're communicating change to your organization, to your people, when you can explain why you're doing something, why you're moving from one set of values to another, why you're changing a policy, that explanation is what induces trust. If you just announce it with no context and no explanation, people start to figure out for themselves, why is this really happening, and it's a recipe to really diminish trust. And it's the same for technology and for recommendations and for decisions, is when you can explain them, and when the technology can be explained, it's a really big accelerant for trust, and really underpins trust between you and the people that you're hiring into your organization. Is it valid? That obviously goes without saying, a really important question, which is, no one's going to use technology that's really cool but that doesn't have any validity and doesn't work. But outside of that, there's really the other dimension as well, which is, when you're looking at us, when you're looking at other vendors, is, getting to really feel comfortable and safe with who they are and how they manage some really critical risks like your candidate data and your data. Are they treating that like the crown jewels? What are their security systems in place? The other one is around team diversity. In as much as what I shared before, it's a bit of a furphy to assume that the engineers' biases are going to be fed into the AI. It's still really important to make sure that there's team diversity, because you're typically using this technology to be across a broad range of candidates, and across a broad range of markets, and you want to make sure that that group really understands that and gets that. And then finally, transparency. Are you able to actually see their tech manual? Have they published their science, their research? If the organization is not willing to share with you, how their technology works, then we think that's a sort of a question that might impact on trust. Some questions that we encourage you to ask. I think, if there were two key things we'd love to see the market really embrace out of this, it's that first framework, the mental model one, which we think is a really good conversation starter within your teams. And the other one is this one, is to really challenge yourself and challenge the vendor about all of these questions. I don't know why we've called them all one, but there are 8 questions, and we've actually written a bit of a guide. If you want to download that, please feel free to do that from our websites. I'm going to just flick through fairly quickly. I don't know if there are any questions, Booty, that I should be answering.
There's Bob, there's 2 questions. Maybe that's come up. So
Yeah.
there's one question around, if AI is doing our interviews, what will our recruiters be doing? So I think it's related to, maybe something related to
Yeah,
volume. And
yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I'll take that one, which is,
yeah.
wow, what a great problem to have. So, the first thing I'd say is I'd start with what is your people strategy and your talent strategy? Like, where do you feel you need to move forward and get an edge, in your market against your competitors? And I bet it's not the speed with which they're screening candidates. I'm sure it's something else. It could be around your EVP. It could be around sourcing. It could be around, really being business partners to your hiring managers to help them understand what is the role that I really need to fill here. Guiding them on their candidates that they're meeting with at that final round to make sure that they have a really objective and fair engagement at that stage. But it's definitely not doing screening, and I don't think there are many recruiters that really want to come to work every day and screen CVs and do phone screens. So, there's obviously a cost reduction opportunity with using this technology. Many of our customers do what we sort of describe as sort of fund the journey through looking at the number of people that we have now versus the number that we need. But I think the real opportunity is for them to be involved in activities that are more human. I used to work in the graduate space for a professional services firm, really competitive space. And if I had more time because I was using technology like this, I'd be putting it into winning those cross offers. When you've got those amazing, talented people for those very pointy edge roles, and you're competing with one of your companies in market, and if you can win them over, it's going to make a big difference to your company's trajectory. You can't use a machine to do that. That's a role for a human. So I think there's a huge opportunity to kind of reimagine how you use your talent, your TA talent, to better serve the business and do more value added activity from automating the screening part.
There's a question from Rohan. It seems he has some questions. He's happy to ask them
Yeah,
if you
go
want.
for it, Rowan.
Yeah.
Sure. Hey, Bob, here with you. It was pretty interesting to know your point of view with respect to AI. I just had one basic question. It's like a chicken and egg story. So right now I'm in an organization with a headcount of around 350 odd people. And I'm not sure if we have a proper historic data in place and all. I just wanted to know if, and our biggest issue is right fit hiring, because we have a lot of attrition happening at people who are just joining in within the first year to 1.5 years. And that's what I wanted to go ahead and do an AI get to an AI approach to hire the right people. But Budhi and Bob, the basic thing that I wanted to ask you is, like, in predictive hire, this with respect to predictive, not other AI solutions that are there. Do you guys tailor that algorithm which the system builds in with respect to the geography, the job type, and what if I don't have a past data of, like, maybe I'll just have a data of 2 years or 3 years? Will we still be able to get a perfect model which tells me whether this particular thing is the right fit or not?
So I'll answer that. Great question. So I think some of the questions are, if you're relatively new as a business, and you don't have a lot of history of hiring data, can you still use technology like us? The first thing to say is we don't use any of your data to start with, because to be honest, your data is kind of biased. You've already filtered for what you want, and you may or may not love what you have in terms of talent. So the way our product works is we have what we call rule-based models that we build around your ideal profile. So we understand from you right up front when you're hiring into a role family, each model is by role family. What are you looking for? Are you looking for someone with exceptional comm skills? You're looking for someone that's high in resilience, with strong problem-solving capability. We seek to understand that, and then we build the ability to discover that from 5 questions. We don't need any data from you to go live. And if you said, I'm about to start hiring, you could go live this afternoon. So that's the first thing. The second is in terms of the customization, absolutely. When we use this technology, we recognize that there are cultural differences, right? That the way people will respond, in India and even provinces in India is going to be different to, other countries around the world. And so every model we create is unique to that role family. It's unique to that geography, and it's unique to you. So there's that customization all happens up front. And, that's really the power of them being able to, over time, take that data of who is hired and who's done really well to make it more and more like your organization. So that the machine gets smarter and smarter, a bit like Netflix gets smarter and smarter at identifying what shows you really love from tracking your viewing. It gets better and better at figuring out what profile of success is really going to be the best one for your organization. Now, the one thing I'll show is, if you have great performance data, and performance data, what I mean by that is, let's say leaver data, big reality for a lot of businesses is people come and people go, and that's a huge cost to the business. If you capture data, which every business does because it's part of payroll of, the people that came and the people that stayed 6 days, 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years, and that's really a measure of performance for your business because churn is not great for different reasons. That data is power. That's the data that recruiters have craved for years to understand, what's working, what isn't, but which is humanly impossible to feed into recruitment. That's what our technology does. It takes that data and it retrains the model. So the model more and more gets closer to the ideal, and you're always raising the bar with every single hire. That's the kind of, accelerant of using AI technology in your recruitment in a way that you will never get there when you're using humans to do your recruitment, which is why we think it's, such a powerful technology for, and a powerful competitive edge for organizations.
Thanks, Bob.
Okay, we're sort of almost running out of time. So I'm just going to very quickly take you to just 2 final slides. Thank you so much for your time and being part of this. The first thing to just kind of quickly restate is, I know it feels scary to really embrace and understand AI, but, what AI allows you to do is it's data. Pure and simply, it's data, and data allows you to see things that we can't see. You can also then debias when you've got a data-based solution in a way that you can't really debias us as humans. And a machine is not a sentient being. It's only biased if you feed it with biased data. And so the beauty of using technology that's genuinely blind is you get to see talent that we can't see because we're blinded by our own biases and our own experience. But fundamentally, what Booty and I want to leave you with is, it's just a tool. I think it's been amplified in popular culture as being this thing that's going to take over the world and, it's better than human intelligence. It's absolutely not. It's very much a tool. It's a co-pilot for you. And it's to help you obviously get that efficiency, but really to make smarter decisions, because decisions made off data are absolutely going to be smarter decisions. So that's it from us. We're again really grateful for your time, and please do share with us any questions that you still have. Connect with us on our website. There's a lot of really interesting content there that's original content that we write to help the market understand this space. Follow us on LinkedIn or track us on Twitter, and let us know. My address is barb@predictivehire.com. Booty's is Booty, BUDDHI. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. And thanks so much for your time.